And moving on, G7 meeting of finance ministers held a meeting to discuss the possibility of a joint release of emergency oil reserves. Following meeting, France's finance minister Roland Lescure said G7 ready to take all necessary measures to stabilize energy markets. Lescure said that for the moment there was no problem with oil or gas supply, whether in Europe or in the United States.
I want to be very clear today. The oil market and the gas market as well is being affected by disruption, mainly linked to the fact that oil and gas exports leaving the Middle East are heading to Asia, a region therefore directly impacted by market upheavals. Today, there is no problem with oil and gas supply, whether in Europe or in the United States. Nevertheless, we will look closely at how we can stabilize all flows, the entire market, and I repeat, by examining all measures, including, if necessary, the release of strategic reserves.
Well, G7 finance ministers have discussed the release of emergency oil reserves, but the use of this strategic option will depend on market developments, German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil said in Brussels on Monday.
You saw the French declaration that we are now also keeping open the option of drawing on national oil reserves. Now is not the right time, but we, including Germany, are open to doing so in a coordinated process at the appropriate time.
The head of the IEA, Fatih Birol, also took part in the meeting of G7 finance ministers on the global economic situation in West Asia conflict, providing an update on the IEA's view of conditions in global oil markets. The head of IEA said that global oil markets have deteriorated in recent days. Fatih Birol also added, in addition to the challenges of transit through the Strait of Hormuz, a substantial amount of oil production has been curtailed. This is creating significant and growing risk for the market, he added. At the meeting, they also discussed all the available options, including marking IEA emergency oil stocks available to the market. Now, the head of IEA also said that IEA member countries currently hold over 1.2 billion barrels of public emergency oil stocks, with a further 600 million barrels of industry stocks held under government obligation. And European finance ministers were closely monitoring oil prices on Monday and were actively considering measures to mitigate any impacts on their economies. Greek finance minister and president of the Eurogroup, Kyriakos Perakakis, said at a news conference. Speaking after the Eurogroup meeting of finance ministers in Brussels, European Economic Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis said the G7 energy ministers stand ready to release strategic oil reserves, while President of the Eurogroup, Kyriakos Perakakis, said they are closely monitoring market reactions to the developments in the Middle East.
We're closely monitoring market reactions to the developments in the Middle East. This is what dominates international headlines. The European economy has the capacity and the resilience to absorb temporary shocks, but at the same time, we must be prepared for a more prolonged period of instability with potential disruptions in shipping, increases in energy prices, and implications for inflation.
Well, after the meeting of Eurozone finance ministers, Dombrovskis said the G7, the United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, Italy, Germany and France were in agreement to coordinate their actions on oil. European Economic Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis warned against easing sanctions on Russia.
It's important that we do not now ease the pressure on Russia and do not help Russia to fill its war chest using this situation of elevated oil and gas prices right now. So that's why it's important that we stay the course with our sanctions, implementing the G7 price cap, moving towards maritime services ban, and we had a discussion indeed on US positioning on this, and also US is broadly aligned with this approach, and they were emphasizing what they were discussing in the case of India being, so to say, very much contained both in terms of time and scope of the measure, so they do not expect substantial impact of this on Russian oil revenues.